Canst thou draw out Leviathan with an hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down? Thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan the piercing serpent, even Leviathan that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. These cryptic passages from the Old Testament have long been puzzled over by theologians and secular scholars alike, with various interpretations being proposed. The passages may seem peculiar to casual readers of the biblical texts, but legends of giant aquatic serpents are ubiquitous in the ancient Near East, the time and place in which the Old Testament was compiled. By examining the biblical Leviathan in this cultural context, we can better understand the purpose behind its usage and meaning in the Hebrew Old Testament. First, let us examine the three most pertinent mentions of Leviathan in the biblical canon. The first and most detailed description comes from the penultimate chapter in the book of Job. We see Leviathan described by Yahweh as being untamable by humans, having scales like armor, dwelling in the depths of the ocean, and breathing fire. The second appearance comes in the 74th Psalm, where Yahweh is credited with having defeated a multi-headed Leviathan at the beginning of the world, when he divided the sea and made land appear. Finally, we get a no less interesting mention in the book of Isaiah. Here, the prophet describes Leviathan as a crooked or twisting serpent, and claims that God will defeat him at the end of time. When examining the biblical texts, it is important to keep in mind that the different books were written by different people in different times and places, and that these texts could have had different purposes behind their composition. So, let us examine the context of each of these passages and fit together the pieces of this puzzle. The first example cited was from the book of Job. This poem describes the story of a man who lost almost everything he possessed and cherished. Surrounded by cynical friends, Job laments and questions why God would allow for such a thing to happen to such a righteous man. At the end of the book, God appears to Job in a whirlwind, and establishes his authority and sovereignty with a lengthy description of his ultimate control over all things in nature. He describes how it is himself who provides water to the wilderness and food to all the animals. He finishes off this speech by describing his control over two great beasts, Behemoth and Leviathan. The second appearance of Leviathan in the Psalms is mentioned to give praise to Yahweh and to give hope to the Jews that God would deliver them from their exile in Babylon. In the last mention cited, Isaiah claims that God will defeat Leviathan once more at the eschaton. Going back to Job 41, Leviathan has been supposed by some to be a crocodile or even a marine dinosaur like a Liopleurodon. But this naturalistic explanation ignores, among other things, the most striking traits of Leviathan, his multiple heads and fire-breathing capability. These aspects of Leviathan make clear that he was a supernatural, mythical being. But why did God finish his list of real animals with a legendary monster? In my last video, I attempted to contextualize ancient Greek culture by explaining the historical background of the early Iron Age. When examining a civilization in this way, we still must be careful to avoid the reductionist view that one culture simply stole from another. We have to find the balanced view, so let us attempt to do so as we examine the cultural and historical context of these biblical passages. It turns out that the idea of a giant aquatic serpent wrestling against a god is not at all unique to the Old Testament. Just north of Israel, in the port city of Ugarit, a text several centuries older than the book of Isaiah, credits the god Baal with having defeated a seven-headed serpent named Litanu, a cognate of the Hebrew Leviathan or Leviathan. Other Ugaritic texts specifically associate Litanu with the sea, just as the Hebrew Bible does. The Ugaritians believed Litanu to be a god of the seas which surrounded the world, in the ancient flat conception of the earth. Litanu is even called the Dragon of Two Flames, perhaps alluding to his ability to breathe fire. Even the Egyptians, who exerted significant cultural influence over the region of Israel throughout its existence, had a similar mythological counterpart. They believed the world was originally a watery abyss called the Nun, and this chaotic state of existence was disrupted by the formation of land. Every night the sun god Ra was threatened by a serpent called Apophis during his journey through the underworld. The dichotomy of order and chaos was extremely prevalent in many cultures in the ancient Near East, and the dichotomy was often symbolized as a conflict between a benevolent god and a malevolent, watery serpent. Therefore, we can be quite sure that Leviathan is meant to serve a figurative purpose in the book of Job. Leviathan is a potent symbol of the chaos of the natural world, so Yahweh emphasizes the fact that he created and can control all things in the natural world, and rhetorically asks why lowly Job believes he has the right to question him. But remember, the books of the Old Testament were written in different contexts and perhaps for different purposes, so let's examine the mention of Leviathan in the Psalms. Here we have a more detailed historical context available. In the early 6th century BCE, the Israelites had been carried off by the Babylonians after the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. The beginning of Psalm 74 recounts this event. The authors find themselves desperate and longing for God to bring justice. The poem's tone becomes hopeful as the psalmist remembers how Yahweh divided the sea and smashed the heads of Leviathan at the beginning of creation. This part of the passage is remarkable because the Babylonians themselves had very similar myths about a god, Marduk or Adad, defeating the chaos dragon at the beginning of time and establishing order. The Israelites' adoption of this myth was turned against the pagan nations, as they put Yahweh above all the other gods. When viewed in its cultural context, it's clear that Psalm 74 was written as a polemic against the Babylonian religion. But why does this psalm claim that Yahweh defeated Leviathan when he created the world? Genesis recalls nothing like this. Are these passages contradictory? They would seem to be if we took a completely literal reading of the passages. Those that claim Leviathan is a mere crocodile or even an extinct marine dinosaur like a Liopleurodon conveniently ignore this fact, along with the supernatural characteristics of Leviathan and the broader ancient Near Eastern context of the Old Testament. Leviathan is something much larger and more impressive than the literalist interpretation allows for. He is the embodiment of natural chaos itself. The authors of Psalm 74 believed Yahweh symbolically defeated this chaos dragon when he divided the sea and established the earth at the beginning of time, and they believed he would similarly smite the pagan nations. Thus, the author of Job uses Leviathan to highlight God's complete control over the natural world, and Isaiah prophesies that God will once again conquer the chaotic world and establish divine order at the end of time. Even the New Testament prophecy of Christ crushing the serpentine Satan with his heel mirrors this primordial battle. The biblical use of serpentine motifs goes beyond Leviathan. Also in the book of Isaiah, the prophet describes his famous vision of the throne of God surrounded by what he calls seraphim. Translated literally, this name means burning one, and they are usually depicted anthropomorphically in art, but the emerging scholarly consensus is that these seraphim were actually thought of as serpentine. This is due primarily to archaeological and linguistic evidence. First of all, the function of the seraphim was to flank the throne of Yahweh and praise him continually. What is interesting about this is the fact that a seal marked with the name of Hezekiah, who reigned during Isaiah's lifetime, depicts Yahweh as a sun disk flanked by serpents. The art style is obviously Egyptianizing. Moreover, Hezekiah is described as a godly and righteous king by Isaiah himself, who raged against the pagan nations frequently. What are we to take from this? As I showed with Leviathan, it was common in the ancient Near East to borrow attributes and symbols from deities of other cultures and to apply them to one's own deity. It was not considered sinful by the ancient Israelites to elevate Yahweh above pagan deities in this fashion. In Egyptian art, the sun god may be shown as a sun disk flanked by winged serpents. These were called uraei. The same name was given to the protective snake which surmounted the headdress of pharaohs. This is the same purpose of the seraphim in Isaiah 6. The modern Western view of angels doesn't allow for such a fearsome, slithering creature to be in the throne room of God, but in the ancient world, snakes were often viewed positively, viewed as wise and discerning. Finally, the 30th chapter of Isaiah refers to flying, fiery serpents living in the desert. This seems to be a cultural nickname for any number of venomous cobras which inhabited the Negev desert. We know that in Egypt, cobras were thought of as earthly counterparts to the divine uraei, their hoods being symbolic of wings. These passages, along with the most famous passage of a serpent in the Bible, the one mentioned in Genesis which tempts Eve into committing the first act of rebellion against God, is widely misunderstood and used by some to discredit the Bible as just a story of fairy tales, irrelevant to our modern age. However, by understanding the cultural context of the biblical texts, it is easier to grasp their timeless literary brilliance and theological messaging.